Welcome to Luxurious Tales. If you love powerful stories, don't forget to like, share, and comment. Subscribe to Luxurious Tales and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Listen closely. The story begins now. Serena Whitmore's childhood unfolded in a narrow, sunlit neighborhood on the outskirts of a Midwestern city, where mornings began with the sound of buses groaning awake and evenings closed with her mother's soft humming while folding laundry. Joanne Whitmore raised her daughter alone after an unexpected illness took Serena's father when she was barely old enough to remember his face. Life was structured, deliberate, and modest. Bills were paid on time, meals were planned carefully, and gratitude was practiced like a discipline. Serena learned early that stability was not luck, it was built, protected, and respected. Joanne never spoke of extended family beyond a single name whispered on rare nights, Evelyn, always followed by silence. Serena grew up believing they had no one else, and she learned to carry herself with quiet strength, never loud enough to demand attention, but steady enough to command trust. Across the state, Caleb Whitmore's upbringing followed a different rhythm entirely. His home was filled with urgency, arguments, and ambition sharpened by scarcity. Douglas Whitmore worked multiple jobs, always exhausted, always reminding Caleb that poverty was a temporary condition for those who refused to accept it. Patricia Whitmore, fiercely image-conscious, measured success by how others reacted to you, how they looked at you when you entered a room. Caleb absorbed that lesson deeply. From a young age, he promised himself he would never be invisible, never ordinary, never dependent. While Serena learned patience, Caleb learned hunger. He studied the behavior of people with influence, memorized the language of confidence, and practiced smiling even when nothing felt secure. He did not want peace, he wanted recognition, validation, and proof that he had outrun his beginnings. Though Serena and Caleb grew up unaware of each other's existence, their paths were already running parallel, separated only by values they would one day clash over. Serena believed a good life was one that held together quietly, without spectacle. Caleb believed a good life announced itself loudly and left witnesses behind. Both carried wounds shaped by loss, but where Serena's loss taught her to protect what she had, Caleb's taught him to chase what he didn't. Fate, patient and observant, watched as both lives matured toward a collision neither could yet imagine, one that would test love, loyalty, and the devastating cost of underestimating what silence can hide. Serena entered college with the same quiet discipline her mother had taught her, choosing finance and logistics not because they sounded impressive, but because they made sense. She liked systems, how numbers could predict outcomes, how planning reduced chaos. While others chased prestige, Serena chased reliability, imagining a future where she could provide stability for a family without borrowing peace from anyone else. She worked part-time to avoid debt, kept meticulous schedules, and spent evenings studying instead of chasing distractions. Her closest friend, Maribel Ruiz, admired Serena's calm focus and emotional clarity, often teasing her for being too grown for their age. Serena smiled at that, because maturity felt less like a burden and more like armor she had learned to wear early. Caleb's college years burned with urgency and ambition. He switched majors twice, not from confusion but calculation, chasing whichever path promised faster recognition. He took internships aggressively, volunteered for projects others avoided, and learned how to speak with confidence even when certainty escaped him. His closest companion, Nathan Cole, often acted as the grounding presence, reminding Caleb to slow down, to think beyond applause. But Caleb rarely listened. He studied people the way others studied textbooks, noting how influence moved through rooms and how perception shaped opportunity. To him, success wasn't about comfort, it was about escape. Every achievement felt like a step farther from the life he feared returning to, and that fear fueled him relentlessly. Though their campuses were miles apart, Serena and Caleb unknowingly moved toward the same future from opposite philosophies. Serena dreamed of a balanced life built patiently, while Caleb dreamed of a powerful life built loudly. Both believed effort would be rewarded, but they defined reward differently. Serena wanted peace and purpose, Caleb wanted dominance and visibility. Neither knew yet that their dreams would eventually intersect and collide in ways that would test whether love could survive when one partner mistook ambition for worth and the other mistook silence for weakness. The corporate training retreat that brought Serena and Caleb together was designed to teach collaboration under pressure, but neither expected it to rewrite their personal trajectories. Set in a quiet conference lodge far from city noise, the retreat forced strangers into shared problem-solving exercises and long hours of conversation. Serena noticed Caleb first because of how easily he commanded attention. His confidence filled spaces before his words did. Caleb noticed Serena later, intrigued not by volume but by composure. She spoke only when necessary, but when she did, people listened. During a late-night group exercise, they found themselves paired together, exchanging careful observations that quickly turned into unguarded honesty neither had planned to reveal. Their connection grew in the spaces between structured sessions. Walks during breaks became conversations about childhood, ambition, and fear. Serena spoke about her mother, about learning to plan for tomorrow because no one else would. Caleb spoke about escape, about never wanting to be overlooked again. He admired Serena's steadiness, mistaking it for simplicity rather than depth, while she admired his drive, unaware of how much it was fueled by insecurity. Their differences felt complementary, not conflicting. Where Caleb pushed forward, Serena grounded. Where Serena hesitated, Caleb encouraged. It felt like balance, and both mistook that feeling for permanence. By the end of the retreat, neither questioned what was forming. Distance did little to slow them. Calls stretched late into the night, messages filled quiet hours, and visits were planned with eagerness. Serena believed she had found someone who understood partnership as shared growth. Caleb believed he had found someone who would support his rise without competing for the spotlight. Love arrived gently, without warning signs or alarms, weaving optimism into their expectations. Neither realized that the very assumptions drawing them together would later pull them apart, once ambition demanded more than affection was prepared to give. Their wedding day unfolded like a dream written in modest ink, no extravagant guests or golden chandeliers, just a small garden venue wrapped in sunlight and laughter. Serena's eyes glistened with sincerity when she vowed forever, believing love was enough to weather anything life might hurl their way. Caleb, handsome and ambitious in his navy suit, smiled with confidence rather than vulnerability. To him, marriage felt like a milestone on the ladder of success, another badge that declared he was moving forward. Joanne Whitmore wept quietly, grateful her daughter had found happiness, while Nathan and Maribel stood side by side, sensing an unspoken imbalance even amid the celebration. It was love, yes, but a love founded on uneven dreams. Married life began with small triumphs and subtle cracks. Serena took a step back from her career to support Caleb's pursuits, handling their finances, managing their schedules, and creating an environment where he could chase the next big opportunity without distraction. Caleb, meanwhile, grew addicted to progress, always looking beyond the present moment for something larger, brighter, louder. Serena cherished simple victories, like their quiet dinners and weekend walks, but Caleb viewed stillness as stagnation. They lived together but saw life differently. She was building a home, he was building an empire. The dissonance was quiet at first, a hum in the background neither wanted to acknowledge. It was during one of Caleb's networking galas that Dahlia Cross entered the picture. Bold, magnetic, and ambitious, she was everything Serena was not, and everything Caleb's ego craved. She laughed loudly, wore confidence like perfume, and made him feel like the center of every room. Serena met her that night, unaware of what Dahlia would eventually become. Dahlia smiled warmly, complimented Serena's grace, and then turned her charm toward Caleb like a spotlight. Not long after, Serena discovered she was pregnant. Caleb's excitement was genuine but brief. He viewed fatherhood as another challenge to juggle, not a new chapter to savor. Serena, glowing with hope, believed this child, Amara Whitmore, would anchor their love. She didn't realize she was the only one trying to keep the ground beneath them from breaking apart. Amara Whitmore's arrival reshaped Serena's world in ways both tender and demanding. Sleepless nights blended into careful mornings as Serena learned to measure time in feedings, schedules, and quiet moments stolen at dawn. She managed the household with the same precision she once applied to spreadsheets, ensuring stability even when exhaustion pressed heavily on her shoulders. Motherhood did not diminish her, it clarified her purpose. Serena found strength in routine, in knowing that consistency could build safety for a child. Joanne visited often, offering gentle advice and reassurance, reminding Serena that love was not loud, but dependable. Serena believed this phase would draw her marriage closer, that shared responsibility would deepen connection. For Caleb, fatherhood arrived differently. He loved his daughter, but the timing felt inconvenient. Opportunities were accelerating, expectations rising, and pressure mounting from peers who measured success by outward milestones rather than quiet fulfillment. Caleb began staying later at work events, justifying absences as necessary sacrifices for the future. When he came home, his mind lingered elsewhere, already planning the next move. Serena noticed the distance growing, not in arguments but in absences, missed moments, shortened conversations, distracted responses. Caleb felt trapped between ambition and obligation, and instead of confronting the tension, he chose avoidance, convincing himself it was temporary. Dahlia Cross reappeared gradually, never abruptly enough to cause alarm. She positioned herself as support, someone who understood Caleb's hunger for advancement, someone who admired his drive without asking for emotional presence in return. She spoke his language fluently, praising his vision and subtly dismissing the value of domestic stability. Serena sensed the shift long before she understood it. The air in their marriage felt heavier, expectations unspoken but pressing. Still, Serena chose patience. She believed love was resilient, that seasons changed, and that commitment meant enduring imbalance with grace. She did not yet know that patience, when mistaken for weakness, often invites cruelty rather than appreciation. The change in Caleb was no longer subtle, it had a texture Serena could feel in the air between them. Conversations that once flowed easily now felt transactional, reduced to logistics and obligations. Caleb spoke more about appearances, who attended which event, who drove what car, who was gaining influence, and less about home. Serena noticed how often he compared their life to others, always finding something lacking. Her calm responses, once admired, now irritated him. He interpreted her contentment as complacency, her restraint as a lack of ambition. Serena, sensing the shift, tried to meet him halfway, suggesting conversations, shared plans, moments of reconnection. Caleb brushed them aside, insisting everything was fine while growing increasingly distant. Dahlia Cross, meanwhile, refined her presence with precision. She never openly disrespected Serena, instead, she planted ideas gently, like seeds designed to grow unchecked. She joked about how some people are just meant for domestic life, praised Caleb's potential being wasted on small thinking, and spoke often about the cost of loyalty to the wrong environment. Caleb absorbed every word. Around Dahlia, he felt understood, admired, and validated without question. It was intoxicating. Enter Victor Hale, a sharp-edged mentor with a reputation for ruthless success. Victor encouraged Caleb to cut emotional ties that slowed progress, reminding him that sentiment had no place in serious ambition. To Victor, attachments were leverage or liabilities. During a rare quiet evening, Joanne mentioned Serena's grandmother again, almost accidentally. The name, Evelyn Hartwood, hung in the air briefly before Joanne redirected the conversation. Serena noticed, but did not press. She had learned long ago that some silences were deliberate. Caleb barely registered the exchange, his attention was elsewhere, already consumed by plans and perceptions beyond the walls of their home. That night, Serena lay awake, listening to the steady rhythm of her daughter's breathing, sensing something fragile beginning to fracture. She did not yet know what shape the damage would take, only that something essential was slipping through their fingers, unnoticed by the man she still hoped would turn back. Caleb's ascent finally reached a visible milestone when his name began circulating in influential circles, spoken with a mix of admiration and curiosity. Invitations arrived more frequently, each one promising proximity to power and proof that his relentless pursuit had paid off. He learned to dress the part, speak with rehearsed confidence, and curate impressions as carefully as financial projections. Recognition thrilled him, but it also sharpened his impatience. He became obsessed with optics, how his life looked rather than how it felt. Serena noticed the shift immediately. Compliments gave way to critiques, and pride turned into expectation. What once felt like partnership now resembled performance, with Serena cast in a role she had never auditioned for. As Caleb's visibility increased, so did his discomfort with Serena's quiet authenticity. He began correcting her in public, subtly at first, then with unmistakable edge. He questioned her choices, her preferences, her refusal to compete with others' extravagance. Serena tried to understand, reminding him gently that success did not require abandoning values. Her words landed like static against his ambition. Dahlia, on the other hand, thrived in this new environment. She dressed for attention, spoke with flair, and praised Caleb loudly and often. She positioned herself unapologetically as someone who belonged beside a rising figure, openly framing herself as an upgrade without ever using the word. The tension followed them home, thickening each room with unspoken resentment. Serena sensed the growing contempt beneath Caleb's smiles, the way admiration had curdled into judgment. She felt herself shrinking in his presence, not because she lacked confidence, but because he no longer recognized the strength she carried quietly. Amara's laughter still filled the house, grounding Serena in purpose, but Caleb seemed increasingly detached from domestic life. Appearances had become currency, and he was determined to spend them lavishly, even if it meant devaluing the very foundation that had supported him when recognition was nothing more than a distant dream. The home Serena once nurtured into a place of warmth slowly transformed into a space filled with tension and restraint. Mornings became quiet negotiations, evenings stretched into silence broken only by routine necessities. Serena carried the emotional weight alone, shielding Amara from the coldness creeping into their daily life. She smiled for her daughter, maintained structure, and refused to let instability touch the child's world. Inside, however, Serena felt the erosion keenly. The man who once listened intently now responded with impatience, as though every question was an interruption. Love had not vanished, it had been crowded out, suffocated by ambition and resentment. Caleb's demeanor hardened as his success grew. He began speaking to Serena with a dismissive tone that shocked her at first, then wounded her deeply. Small disagreements escalated into critiques of her relevance, her choices, her inability to keep up. Patricia Whitmore reinforced this behavior during visits, openly praising Caleb's progress while subtly questioning Serena's contribution to his rising stature. Serena endured the comments with dignity, but the isolation grew heavier. She realized she was no longer viewed as a partner but as a reminder of a past Caleb wanted to outgrow. Still, she held her ground quietly, believing endurance was an act of strength. Late at night, when the house finally rested, Serena allowed herself to consider the unthinkable, leaving. The thought terrified her, not because of uncertainty, but because of the stability she had fought so hard to create for Amara. She weighed every option carefully, choosing patience over impulse, consistency over confrontation. Serena believed that holding the family together mattered more than defending her pride. She did not yet understand that staying, in this case, was slowly teaching Caleb that her silence meant consent. The house still stood, but its foundation had begun to crack, and no one besides Serena seemed willing to notice. Serena did not uncover the truth through confrontation or confession, but through a quiet accumulation of signs that refused to stay hidden. A misplaced jacket carrying an unfamiliar scent, a calendar notification dismissed too quickly, a shift in Caleb's phone habits that felt deliberate rather than accidental. The confirmation came one afternoon when Serena attended a charity luncheon with Maribel and saw Caleb across the room, standing too close to Dahlia Cross, their shared laughter unguarded, their familiarity unmistakable. The moment passed quickly, unnoticed by most, but Serena felt something inside her settle with painful clarity. There was no explosion, no scene. Just understanding, heavy and final, pressing against her chest. When Serena confronted Caleb later that evening, her voice remained steady, her questions precise. She did not accuse, she asked. Caleb's response stunned her more than denial ever could. He did not apologize. He did not deflect. Instead, he admitted the affair with a casual confidence that stripped the moment of dignity. He spoke as though the outcome were inevitable, framing his betrayal as evolution rather than choice. Dahlia, he claimed, understood his direction, his needs, his future. Serena listened without interruption, absorbing not just the words, but the indifference behind them. The man before her no longer recognized the value of what he was breaking. Dahlia wasted no time asserting her presence. She called Serena directly days later, her tone polite but territorial, thanking her for being mature and implying that transitions required cooperation. The audacity was chilling. Caleb began rearranging schedules, separating finances, and speaking of the home as temporary. He discussed options, not reconciliation. Serena realized then that the affair was not a detour, it was preparation. The groundwork for her removal had already been laid. Still, she remained composed, retreating inward to protect herself and her daughter. Caleb mistook her silence for surrender, unaware that restraint, when stretched too far, often precedes irreversible change. The confrontation arrived not with raised voices, but with a stillness so deliberate it unsettled Caleb. Serena waited until Amara was asleep, the house quiet enough to hear the refrigerator hum, and then asked him to sit. Her tone was measured, her posture calm, the kind of composure that signaled resolve rather than pleading. She spoke about absence, about trust, about the erosion she could no longer ignore. She asked what he wanted, plainly, without accusation. For a moment, Caleb seemed caught off guard by her clarity. Then his defensiveness hardened into something colder. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and treated the conversation like a negotiation he had already won. Caleb's words cut with precision. He dismissed Serena's contributions as support work, minimized her sacrifices, and reframed her patience as dependency. He spoke of momentum and trajectory, of how partnerships needed to evolve or be left behind. When Serena mentioned family, stability, and shared values, he scoffed, calling them luxuries for people without ambition. Then he struck deeper, mocking what he called her lack of leverage, no influential family, no visible inheritance, no safety net beyond him. He said it casually, almost kindly, as if explaining a basic truth she should have understood all along. Serena felt the insult land, not as anger, but as revelation. This was not confusion, it was contempt. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. Serena simply told him that worth could exist without display, that power did not always announce itself, and that silence did not mean absence. Caleb laughed softly, misreading restraint as defeat. He assured her that reality would prove him right, that when the dust settled she would understand how the world worked. Serena stood, thanked him for his honesty, and walked away with a composure that unsettled him more than tears ever could. What Caleb failed to recognize was that he had just crossed a line from which there was no return, one that would, in time, expose how dangerously little he understood about the woman he was preparing to discard. The day Caleb ended it was deliberate, staged with the same precision he applied to business decisions. He chose a morning when Amara was at preschool and Serena was packing lunches, turning routine into rupture. Papers were already prepared, bags already set by the door, boundaries already drawn in his mind. He spoke calmly, almost professionally, explaining that the arrangement was no longer efficient for his future. There was no shouting, no chaos, just an unmistakable directive to leave. Serena stood frozen for a moment, absorbing the finality in his voice, the way he had already moved past her in his imagination. When she asked about Amara, his response was dismissive, assuring her she would manage and reminding her that child support existed for situations like hers. Serena gathered what she could without dramatics, refusing to let panic define the moment. She moved through the house slowly, touching familiar corners as if memorizing them for the last time. When she returned with Amara later that afternoon, Caleb avoided eye contact, already rehearsing his future narrative. He bragged, casually, cruelly, that she would come back eventually, that reality would force her hand, that she would beg when the costs of independence became clear. Dahlia arrived shortly after, unapologetic and triumphant, surveying the space like a conquest completed. She congratulated Caleb openly, speaking of freedom and upgrades, treating Serena's displacement as an overdue correction rather than a wound inflicted. Serena left without argument, holding Amara's hand tightly as they stepped into uncertainty. She did not plead, threaten, or remind Caleb of promises made. Her restraint unsettled him more than resistance would have. As the door closed behind her, Caleb felt vindicated, convinced he had made a necessary cut. Inside, Dahlia poured drinks, laughing as though the future had finally begun. Neither noticed the silence Serena carried with her, heavy, controlled, and unresolved. It was not the silence of defeat, but of endurance, gathering strength quietly as the world assumed she had already lost. Caleb's celebration began before the reality of what he had done could settle. That same evening, he and Dahlia hosted a private gathering at a downtown lounge known for exclusivity rather than warmth. Laughter spilled easily from their table as glasses clinked and congratulations flowed from acquaintances eager to align themselves with perceived success. Caleb spoke boldly about reinvention, about shedding what no longer served him, presenting the collapse of his family as a strategic move rather than a moral failure. Dahlia leaned into the narrative effortlessly, praising his decisiveness and framing the moment as the beginning of an upgraded life. The absence of Serena and Amara was treated not as loss, but as clearance. Nathan Cole attended briefly, drawn by obligation rather than enthusiasm. He listened quietly as Caleb bragged about how Serena would soon realize her mistake and return asking for help. Nathan said little, his discomfort visible in the tightness of his expression. When Dahlia joked about outgrowing domestic limitations, Nathan excused himself, offering no toasts, no congratulations. His withdrawal did not go unnoticed, but it was dismissed. Caleb had learned to equate dissent with jealousy, and that assumption shielded him from self-examination. By the end of the night, Nathan had distanced himself completely, choosing silence over complicity in a moment that felt deeply wrong. Meanwhile, Serena and Amara settled into temporary anonymity, disappearing from the social map that had once revolved around Caleb's rising profile. Serena did not announce her departure or explain herself publicly. She secured modest housing, enrolled Amara in a new school, and focused on restoring routine. Whispers circulated, speculation painted her as bitter, dependent, and unprepared for independence. Public opinion, shaped by Caleb's charm and confidence, leaned in his favor. Serena led it. She understood that truth did not require immediate witnesses. As Caleb toasted his freedom over champagne and applause, Serena quietly rebuilt from ashes, unseen, underestimated, and far from finished. Serena's days took on a quieter rhythm, shaped by necessity and intention rather than reaction. She found a small, clean apartment close to Amara's new school, choosing safety, light, and consistency over comfort. Mornings began early, evenings ended predictably, and weekends were reserved for rebuilding routines that made her daughter feel secure. Serena took work that matched her training, structured, demanding, and dependable, without drawing attention to herself. She kept her name off social conversations and her history off public records. To anyone watching from a distance, she looked like a woman starting over with little leverage. In truth, she was laying foundations with patience sharpened by experience. Maribel Ruiz became her anchor during those months. She showed up without questions that demanded answers Serena wasn't ready to give, offering childcare when schedules collided and conversation when silence grew heavy. Together, they navigated school meetings, budgeting realities, and the invisible exhaustion that followed Serena everywhere. Maribel never spoke ill of Caleb, never pushed for confrontation or revenge. She understood that Serena's restraint was strategic, not submissive. Amara adjusted slowly but steadily, her resilience reflecting the stability Serena fought to preserve. Each small victory, a report card, a bedtime laugh, a peaceful morning, reinforced Serena's belief that survival did not need an audience. Serena refused legal escalation despite encouragement from those who believed she was entitled to more. She declined interviews, ignored rumors, and returned unanswered messages to sender. Her focus remained narrow and deliberate: protect Amara, rebuild quietly, and keep moving forward without bitterness. Nights were hardest, when memories surfaced uninvited, but even then Serena chose reflection over regret. She did not curse the past or romanticize it, she studied it. In the shadows where she now lived, Serena learned a crucial truth: being underestimated was not a disadvantage. It was a shield, one she wore willingly as the world assumed she had already reached her limit. The call came on an ordinary afternoon, interrupting Serena as she reviewed logistics notes at her kitchen table. The voice on the line was formal, precise, and unfamiliar, requesting confirmation of her identity before proceeding. When the name Evelyn Hartwood was spoken, Serena felt a quiet disorientation, as if a sealed door in her memory had been touched for the first time. She had heard the name only in fragments from her mother, always paired with careful pauses. The caller explained that Evelyn had passed and that Serena was listed as next of kin. There was no apology in the tone, no sentiment, only procedure. Serena listened, steadying her breath, aware that something long avoided had finally surfaced. Documents arrived within days, dense with legal language and timelines that stretched back decades. Serena learned that Evelyn Hartwood had been deliberate in her distance, believing separation was protection rather than rejection. The estate representative spoke of confidentiality, of contingencies activated only upon Serena's independence from marriage. Each revelation felt unreal, layered with explanations that reframed Serena's understanding of her family's silence. Joanne's past reticence began to make sense, choices made to shield a child from expectation and scrutiny. Serena asked careful questions, refusing dramatics, insisting on verification. The answers, though restrained, carried weight. This was not coincidence, it was design. When Serena ended the call, she sat quietly, absorbing the shift in gravity around her life. Nothing had changed outwardly. Amara would still come home from school, dinner would still be cooked, but the future had tilted. Serena did not celebrate or panic. She wrote lists, noted deadlines, and scheduled meetings with cautious distance. What unsettled her most was not the scale hinted at, but the timing. This inheritance did not arrive as rescue, it arrived as responsibility. Serena understood instinctively that what lay ahead would test her restraint more than her strength, and that silence would remain her most powerful ally. The confirmation arrived not as spectacle, but as certainty. In a private conference room far removed from headlines and curiosity, Serena listened as legal counsel laid out the structure of Evelyn Hartwood's holdings with meticulous restraint. The numbers were staggering, but they were presented clinically: controlling interests, voting rights, staggered trusts, contingency clauses that activated only after Serena's marital separation. The design was intentional and protective, crafted to ensure independence rather than indulgence. Serena asked precise questions about liabilities, governance, and continuity, absorbing the scope without visible reaction. She did not smile, gasp, or falter. What registered most clearly was not the magnitude of the fortune, but the responsibility it carried. The history followed, careful and contained. Evelyn Hartwood had built her empire through strategic acquisitions and disciplined expansion, shielding family from public association to prevent entitlement and exploitation. Distance had been policy, not abandonment. Serena learned that her mother's modest life had been supported quietly, without visibility, and that Serena herself had been watched from afar, her education, her choices, her resilience noted but never interfered with. The clause that delayed transfer until Serena stood independently was not punishment, it was proof. Evelyn had wanted certainty that her legacy would be stewarded by character rather than convenience. Serena met that condition without ever knowing it existed. When Serena left the meeting, the world looked unchanged, and she intended to keep it that way. There would be no announcements, no declarations, no recalibration of her daily life. She returned home, helped Amara with homework, prepared dinner, and read a bedtime story with the same steady cadence as always. Internally, however, Serena began organizing timelines and priorities with renewed clarity. She accepted the inheritance silently, not as a victory, but as a trust. The truth would remain contained for now, protected by discretion, while Serena decided how, and when, the world would be allowed to catch up. Serena's transition into control was deliberate, quiet, and almost invisible to anyone outside a narrow legal and financial circle. She did not step into boardrooms or demand recognition. Instead, she listened. Through carefully scheduled briefings and secure communications, she studied the structure of the empire she now oversaw, how influence moved, where inefficiencies hid, which leaders confused longevity with entitlement. Serena authorized changes gradually, approving restructures that appeared routine on paper but shifted power decisively. Entire divisions were realigned under new oversight, contracts were reviewed, and long-standing assumptions were questioned. Nothing bore her name publicly. To the world, the empire simply evolved. To those within it, a new, disciplined presence had arrived without announcement. Caleb, unaware of the hand-guiding events, found himself unexpectedly dependent on entities he had once considered peripheral. Financing terms tightened. Strategic partnerships he relied on grew cautious, demanding accountability and transparency he had long avoided. He blamed market conditions, competitors, timing, anything but himself. Victor Hale advised aggression, urging Caleb to push harder, take risks, assert dominance. Caleb followed that counsel blindly, convinced pressure would force compliance. He never considered that restraint, not resistance, was what he was encountering. Serena observed from a distance, approving safeguards that protected stability while allowing arrogance to expose itself naturally. Dahlia, meanwhile, thrived briefly in illusion. She enjoyed luxury without understanding its fragility, mistaking access for ownership. As Caleb's stress mounted, her patience thinned. She questioned delays, criticized setbacks, and reminded him of the lifestyle she expected. Serena noted this dynamic with clinical clarity. The empire did not need force to correct imbalance, it required time. By remaining unseen, Serena preserved neutrality, allowing choices to compound without interference. Her silence was not absence, it was strategy. And with every quiet adjustment, the ground beneath Caleb's certainty shifted, imperceptibly at first, but irreversibly. The unraveling did not arrive with a single catastrophic failure, but through a series of denials that accumulated into crisis. Caleb's project stalled simultaneously, each one citing different reasons but sharing the same result: withdrawn confidence. Investors demanded disclosures he could not satisfactorily provide, lenders revised terms without explanation, and long-standing partners suddenly invoked clauses Caleb had never bothered to read closely. He moved from meeting to meeting with rehearsed confidence, insisting this was temporary turbulence. Yet beneath the bravado, panic crept in. His once predictable momentum faltered, replaced by an unfamiliar sense of being boxed in by invisible constraints. The world that had once bent around his ambition now resisted it quietly, firmly. Dahlia was the first to recognize the shift, and her loyalty proved as conditional as Serena had once suspected. She grew restless, questioning Caleb's judgment, mocking his assurances, and openly comparing him to men who appeared more secure. The warmth she once offered evaporated, replaced by impatience and disdain. When expenses tightened and appearances could no longer be maintained effortlessly, Dahlia began distancing herself, missing events, avoiding conversations, preparing exits. She framed her departure as self-preservation, accusing Caleb of dragging her into instability he had promised to outrun. One morning, she left without ceremony, taking what she considered hers and offering no sympathy in return. Caleb was stunned less by her absence than by how quickly admiration had turned to abandonment. Public perception shifted next, subtly at first, then unmistakably. Rumors surfaced, questions about Caleb's reliability, speculation about overreach, whispers of mismanagement. Invitations slowed, then stopped. Associates who once returned calls immediately now filtered responses through assistants. Nathan Cole, watching from a distance, felt a mixture of sadness and inevitability. Caleb's name, once spoken with anticipation, was now mentioned cautiously, often as a cautionary tale. Through it all, Serena remained unseen, approving nothing dramatic, initiating nothing vindictive. The fall was not engineered through force, but through exposure. Caleb's greatest weakness, his refusal to recognize limits, had finally met a system that did not reward arrogance, only accountability. Caleb's final weeks were marked by exhaustion he refused to acknowledge and isolation he pretended did not exist. Sleep became fragmented, meals irregular, and conversations curt. He moved through days with a tight jaw and a rehearsed smile, insisting control would return if he pushed harder. Advisors urged rest, he dismissed them. The idea of slowing felt like surrender, and surrender felt worse than collapse. He replayed conversations in his head, deals that slipped away, promises that evaporated, convinced that one decisive move would reverse everything. Pride kept him upright even as his body signaled distress. He told himself pressure was proof he mattered, that strain was the price of relevance. The end came quietly, without spectacle or warning. A routine morning turned heavy with dizziness, breath shortening as his chest tightened. He attempted to stand, then sank back, the room narrowing to a dull hum. Paramedics arrived quickly, movements efficient and voices calm, but the outcome was beyond negotiation. A stress-induced collapse, the doctors later said, years of unrelenting pressure compounded by denial. There were no dramatic last words, no reconciliation staged for closure. The man who once demanded attention left the world without ceremony, his ambition outpacing his capacity to endure it. Serena learned of his death through a brief message forwarded by Nathan, factual and unadorned. She read it once, then set the phone down, allowing a long breath to pass through her. There was no triumph, no relief sharpened by bitterness, only a sober recognition of finality. She did not attend public remembrances or engage in commentary. That chapter had closed on its own terms. From a distance, she acknowledged the loss without reopening wounds, choosing not to rewrite history or assign meaning where none was needed. The arrogance that once filled rooms had dissolved into silence, leaving Serena to continue forward, steady, composed, and finally unbound. The revelation did not come through ceremony or spectacle, but through necessity. In the weeks following Caleb's death, legal and financial channels began to align publicly, compelled by succession protocols and regulatory disclosures that could no longer remain sealed. Serena's name surfaced first in quiet filings, then in broader confirmations that traced ownership, voting authority, and stewardship back through Evelyn Hartwood's meticulously designed structure. Analysts were stunned by the scale and cohesion of the holdings, by how seamlessly control transferred without disruption. The truth, once released, traveled faster than rumor ever could. Serena Whitmore, long presumed ordinary, was identified as the controlling steward of a $700 billion legacy, her anonymity revealed not as accident, but as intention fulfilled. The response was immediate and uneven. Markets steadied rather than panicked, reassured by the continuity Serena had already ensured. Industry leaders revised assumptions, recontextualizing past decisions that now appeared prescient rather than coincidental. Media outlets scrambled to reconcile timelines, highlighting Serena's restraint, her absence from public power plays, and the deliberate quiet with which she had governed unseen. Within the Whitmore family, the impact landed differently. Patricia Whitmore, confronted with the truth she had dismissed, collapsed under the weight of recognition and regret, her certainty about hierarchy unraveling in a single afternoon. Nathan Cole, reading the disclosures with careful attention, felt a profound respect settle in. This was not revenge revealed, but discipline rewarded. Serena did not address the world directly. She authorized statements that emphasized stability, responsibility, and continuity, declining interviews that sought drama over substance. Her focus remained anchored on what mattered most, Amara's future. Trusts were clarified, protection strengthened, and educational pathways secured without extravagance. Serena understood that power, once named, required clarity more than commentary. She returned home each evening to routine and calm, grounding the extraordinary in the ordinary. The truth had emerged at last, not as a weapon, but as a correction. What had been underestimated was now understood, and Serena, unburdened by the need to explain herself, prepared quietly for what came next. Serena chose a life that did not echo with what had been taken from her, but with what she intended to preserve. She moved deliberately, settling into a home defined by calm rather than grandeur, a place where mornings were predictable and evenings unhurried. Her days were shaped by intention, school runs, shared meals, quiet planning sessions that respected time as a resource rather than a spectacle. The world now knew her name, yet Serena refused to let notoriety dictate her pace. She believed that true arrival was not marked by applause but by alignment, and she guarded that alignment fiercely, ensuring her choices served continuity rather than reaction. Amara flourished in the steadiness Serena built around her. Curiosity replaced uncertainty, laughter returned easily, and confidence grew without pressure. Serena encouraged questions, welcomed mistakes, and modeled resilience without bitterness. She taught Amara that worth was not conferred by inheritance but by stewardship, how one carries responsibility with humility and care. Friends re-entered their lives gradually, not drawn by influence but by trust rebuilt. Maribel remained close, a constant presence who had witnessed the quiet climb from shadows to clarity. Together, they celebrated progress without exaggeration, honoring how far Serena had come without revisiting where she had been pushed away from. Serena did not rewrite history or seek vindication. She allowed the past to rest where it belonged, neither hidden nor rehearsed. The empire continued under her steady oversight, defined by discipline and foresight rather than ego. Caleb's story closed without embellishment, a lesson in unchecked ambition that Serena neither amplified nor erased. What mattered now was the future unfolding on her terms, measured, humane, and durable. In choosing peace over performance, Serena claimed a victory no one could diminish. This was not an ending built on survival, but a beginning shaped by wisdom, where strength spoke softly and endured. Thank you for listening to Luxurious Tales. If this tale moved you, share it with someone, leave a comment, and let us know what you felt. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time.